So, I've been in and around politics for 35 years. That is amazing. Thank you. I've been around politics for 35 years. I've been an MP for 20 years. I've never seen the kind of money that we now have washing around Westminster. And it's insidious, and it's also not quite, it doesn't quite present in the way you would expect. So it's not people turning up to the House of Commons with checkbooks, stepping out of a Rolls Royce and writing politicians a check. It's kind of much more subtler than that. It's people pumping millions into TV stations or think tanks that don't disclose their funding. It's people who organise leadership campaigns, who put money into leadership campaigns, who crucially make sure that their preferred candidate wins a particular election. So it's much more subtle. It's fought at the battle, in a battle of ideas. It's fought at the battle of candidates. And that's not quite obvious to the British public. But the amount of money that is going into British politics now is mind-blowing. I added it up. It's about £1 billion. Over £1 billion has now gone into British political parties since we started a register. And a really surprising amount of that comes from a very, very small number of individuals. And I worry about that.
Do you see it as almost like an Americanization of politics,
100%.
where they rely on these massive donors, and campaigns cost $1 billion, don't they, just to go on tour?
Yeah, 100%. And I talked to Bernie Sanders about this. The Bernie Sanders interview was quite an interesting one. I mean, Bernie is to the left of me, but he's really interesting about the impact of big money on American politics. And he was the one who said to me, look, if you think about this, let's say you're a chip manufacturer or a pharmaceutical company, you're trying to lobby for rules, and you might spend, tens of millions of pounds on trying to influence those rules. But if you get the rules you want, those are billions and billions in economic returns that you're going to get. So in the scheme of things, the amount of money that you invest in lobbying is actually quite small compared to the prizes that are on offer if you get public policy in a place you'd rather like.
And what do you think the solution is to that, to give a voice to people that don't have that kind of economic return of, someone on a council estate up north?
Yeah.
There isn't that payoff of like, well, if I throw £100 at this, I might earn 1,000.
Or indeed in Hodge Hill and Solihull North. No, so I think one, you've got to expose it. Two, I think you need much tougher limits on who is allowed to give. Once upon a time, I was not in favour of state funding of political parties. I think I kind of am now. The Germans have had this quite successfully for a while. If you really want to insulate your politics from the impact of big money, then that might be a step that we have to consider. And, there are some really mad loopholes that we've got. So there is we're not under parliamentary privilege on this podcast, so I'll be careful in my language. But, there is an individual who is deeply involved in one of our political parties, who is deeply connected and has family connections back into Russia. And where we saw, and this is a New York Times story, where we saw money moving out of an individual's bank account in Russia into the bank account of a UK citizen, and then into the coffers of one of our main political parties. And right now, that's perfectly legal. It's morally wrong, but it's currently legal. So there are kind of, mad loopholes like that we should be trying to fix as soon as we can, really.
What parties do you think are benefiting most from this flow of money?
So look, in the past, it's been the Conservative Party and Reform. But if you look at the amount of private donations that's come into the Labour Party, you can basically see that money follows power. And do you know what? That has been true since the Roman Republic. You go back to the works of Cicero and Sallust, they warn about the risks of big oligarchs in politics as a destructive force. And this is just an eternal truth in our politics. And it's, I'm afraid, more true today in British politics than I think I have ever seen in the last 20 years.
Well, is democracy not that every vote is worth the same amount? In a system whereby people can buy influence, then that destroys democracy, right?
100%. And it's just, I think, it took me a while to map this and understand it, because it's not just donations to political parties that you should worry about. In today's media landscape, you've got to worry about people pumping millions into loss-making TV stations. Some of those TV stations route significant amounts of money to particular politicians to pay them to be presenters. But equally, at the level of ideas, most think tanks don't declare where their money comes from. And yet you think about a think tank that might be drawing its money from a particular kind of individual. It then produces a grand report with lots of graphs and analysis and infographics. That's then a talking point on the BBC, gets picked up by the newspapers. It's part of the influence operations. And so I think, we have to look far more at who is paying for influence in our politics, beyond simply looking at who is making, who is writing a check for a particular constituency party.
It's more subtle than they made a donation, because I think a lot of it is like, this person made a £500,000 donation to the Conservative Party. What you're saying,
that's the tip of the iceberg.
It's this like guiding hand of influence.
Exactly. That money that goes to a political party is the tip of the iceberg, and actually what people need to pay far more attention to is the iceberg underneath the water.
That was a clip from our interview with Labour MP Liam Byrne, and you can watch the whole interview right here.